This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the show, I have Leo Melamed. He is a pioneer of financial futures, currencies, stock indexes. Leo was there at the Merc, making it all happen, along with many other people, but he was a leader. He is currently Chairman Emeritus of CME Group, formerly the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. What a great conversation. I'm lucky to get the guys that lived it on this show. I hope you enjoy. Let me jump right in, Leo. I was thinking, you don't recall for sure, because I was just a guy in the audience, but I'm fairly certain it was at an MFA event in Berlin in the spring of 1996. And I was at a small group meeting that you were presenting at. And I have to tell you, it was so inspirational. And this is before I had read your book, Escape to the Futures, but it was so inspirational just to listen to someone talk about overcoming odds. As a young guy who was starting out, it was like to listen to your story. It was just so inspirational to go out and make it. I mean, looking back, even for you, it's still got to be kind of crazy to look at your life story, isn't it?
Well, I do remember, this is in Berlin?
I'm pretty sure it was Berlin.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And you got the date right. And I did make, I don't know what remarks I made, but it was probably something that I usually do in terms of the futures market audiences. So thank you for your review of it.
Hey, listen, here's where I want to jump in, though. So I know it's something near and dear to you, and I've seen you give several speeches. I haven't seen them personally, but I've seen you give several speeches in the last few years and talking about China. And I thought before we did some, going back and discussing some of the key elements in your career, I thought your perspective on China today and where China stands with the development of futures markets, the benefits, and even give a little retrospective that I'm fairly certain the first Chinese president to come to America came to the CME to meet you and the leadership there before they went anywhere else back in 1985. Why don't you discuss this whole love affair that you've had with China, where you see things today as well?
Okay, well, it's a tall order, but I will try. Of course, I began looking at China directly after Nixon and Kissinger changed the view that the America's view at that time was very highly negative, and they viewed them as a communist nation, which they were. However, communism, I kind of knew, was not one item. I mean, was not the same in everywhere it was instituted. And the feeling by the previous administrations was that it's sort of an amorphous thing, and once you're a communist forever, and it's always the same. I didn't think so. And when Kissinger and Nixon opened it up, I was very interested to see whether I was right or whether this was the same Russian-type communism, because if it was, that was hopeless, I thought, and there was no point in my following it. I had a visit, I arranged a visit from the Central Bank of China. I mean, this is at the beginning, so it was like, it had to be around 83, or even 82. I went through normal channels to invite the central banker of China for a visit to the Merc, and lo and behold, they came. I guess it was in style after all. Kissinger and Nixon had been there, and they just wanted to show their interest or something. But they sent a delegation of about 3 people. I took them on the floor, and I gave them all my time I could. They didn't need an interpreter, and that was very helpful. They obviously enjoyed the visit. At the time, of course, we were still floor traders. This was all open outcry, and that's in itself kind of an exciting thing. They had never seen that. They asked me if it would be all right with me if they invite me to China, which I did, and I said yes, and I came, I think it was in 84 that I was there with a couple of people from the market that I took along. And they had the red carpet treatment of us. I mean, it was truly, truly all out to make us feel comfortable. And when I talked, and they gave me an opportunity to talk to some dealers and people in the marketplace. And when I talked to them, I felt these guys don't sound like communists to me. I mean, there's something to it, but these people are thinking of building some free market enterprise here or there and so forth. That's the background by which I invited the Li Shenyan, the president of China, who came in 1985. And since that time, I have spent at least one visit a year. In the last few years, it's been more about 3 visits a year, which is hard for me, but fortunately, I'm only 39 years old, so it's no problem at all.
We're all only 39, Leo. That's the best way to keep it. I'm not 39 either anymore, but I like to think that I am.
That's right. What's his name? There was a comedian, an American comedian, that always said he was 39 no matter what. Anyway, so my last forays, which have been extensive, were to visit with all the futures markets they had. Now, they had a very bad history in futures. Many of those future markets they had, and there was a multitude of them, were bucket shops. They were nothing but gambling dens and really didn't represent the real futures market. No real rules, no deliveries or anything like that. And I had counseled them that these markets aren't really futures. Now, that was in the late 80s. At one time, the government that changed closed all their markets, so about 60 of them. They were all closed. Then in their place, they opened 3 new ones that dealt in agriculture only. And those are the ones that still exist today. And they are extremely well run, and they do enormous volume. The only thing negative about them is they're very internal. So it's only a Chinese audience they speak to, and the traders trade. There are Chinese traders, of course, and there's no interaction with the rest of the world. And I've been telling them for the last 10 years that until they let cross-border trading occur, you won't really know how good that market is or how strong it is or whether the prices really reflect the world pricing, which they don't always. And that's been my message and still is. But in the meantime, I also convinced them that they ought to have a financial market, because the finances where futures have gone. I don't know if you know, but the BIS reported last year that 81% of the futures markets worldwide are in finance. That's an incredible figure. And so they listened. I went through all the motions and held a symposium for them with inviting people like Myron Scholes and the like to speak about the advantage of a financial futures market to their economy. They liked it. And about 4 years ago, they instituted the CFEX, which is the Chinese financial futures market, which listed, at my advice, their Shanghai 300, which is called the CSI 300, and represents the stock market of China, which of course is very of great value to the public and to everyone in China. And now they had another instrument, which I convinced them would be helpful in case there was a bubble in the stock market. They would have a place to hedge some of the risk. They opened it about 4 years ago. I was honored to be the bell ringer, and I was the only round eye in on the stage anyway. And everybody came, though. I mean, the whole world sent a representative, a whole world of futures. And that market has been the most successful market probably ever launched in terms of its volume from day one. Incredible. If you recall, when we open a market, even today, a new market, if we get a total of, 5,000 trades would be enormous. 1,000 is what we really shoot for on the opening day. Well, they had 50,000 their first day. So you had to know this is something else. And it was. It's been very, very successful. And now I'm continuing to advise them. They appointed me to the International Advisory Council of the CSRC, which is their regulatory arm. And that's once a year meeting, and that it was indicative of what they thought of me. They translated all my books into Chinese. Some of them are used in schools. And when I meet with the leaders on the private sector, it is really talking very much to someone here in America. That there is a little difference, except they know that they cannot do a cross-border trading yet, and they want to, and they feel they're ready to. And I think the government's going to move in that direction within the next, I'm going to guess, 2 years. And when that happens, they will finally be able to learn whether their markets are strong enough to compete or not. That's one of their concerns, of course, as it always is for new markets. But I think I have proved to them that if they use Globex as a mechanism for trading, around the clock even, Globex has done extremely well for the countries that have adopted it, whether it's Brazil or Mexico or Korea or Singapore for that matter. All of these markets use Globex in one fashion or other, and it's never been a reduction in their volume. It's always been an increase in their volume. So I think they're going to move in this direction. Now, having said all that, and I know I'm not making a speech for him, but having said all that, clearly the population in China does not have the human rights that we all enjoy in the United States. Most of the world doesn't enjoy as much of the human rights as it does in the U.S. still. And they have rules against things like standing on a soapbox and saying bad things about their government. You'll probably end in jail if you do that. So there are these restrictions, and I've even discussed them openly with many audiences. So I don't get arrested for saying so. Milton Friedman always used to say to me, if the economics create a middle class, then the middle class will demand human rights. And there's a very small middle class in China still. They've got the very rich, and they are very rich, those that are. And they got the very poor, and they are living, some of them, in dire poverty. So the middle class is still very, very small. But I'm hopeful that Milton Friedman was right, and that once they build a middle class, they will have to concern themselves with a different setup of rules than they have presently. That's my speech.
So I had a chance to travel and speak in mainland China last year for about 2 weeks, and I share a lot of your experiences. And it does feel like talking to Americans, they're ready. And I think you're probably right. You just brought up a topic area, an individual that I plan to ask you about today. So I think maybe it's a perfect time to bring him up, and that's Milton Friedman. And I wonder if you might recall maybe the first time you met him, and perhaps recall maybe some of the fondest lessons that you had a chance to take from him, some of the things that you learned from him.
That too is a tall order. But when I first met Milton Friedman, I was still trying to gain credibility on the idea of launching financial futures, because the world thought I was a bit off my rocker, and that it A, was a dumb idea, and B, it wouldn't work, and C, we would be the laughing stock of the world. since our destiny was pork bellies and butter. Well, I didn't believe that, and I was chairman of the exchange, of course, at the time, but the board, I was in my 30s, and I think the board was in their 130s, so we had different viewpoints, and they were the founders of the exchange still, they started their world in butter and eggs, and that's how it's supposed to be, and across the street was the real big brother, the Board of Trade, and what did he trade? He traded the grains, of course, very successfully, so clearly that's where the niche for futures lies. Well, I didn't believe that, and I thought my idea of launching, say, currency futures would lead us into finance. But currencies, I thought, were ripe because I believed Bretton Woods was going to come apart because it was an antiquated fixed exchange rate system. So the guy I could go to, or at least thought I could go to, is Milton Friedman, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. We didn't know each other, but I suspected he knew who I was, and he did. And he offered to meet with me, but it was summer, and he said he's going to be in Vermont. That's his summer home, and would I mind meeting me for, say, breakfast or lunch at the Waldorf Astoria, and we could discuss whatever I wanted. Well, I accepted that invitation. We met at the Waldorf, and I said to him, well, the first thing I said is, please don't laugh. And he assured me he wouldn't laugh. And I told him that I had an idea of launching a financial contract in foreign exchange. And what did he think about that? Well, he embraced me, literally, and said, oh my God, that's a wonderful idea. Do it. I was flabbergasted. I mean, this guy was in my world, he was the economic god, telling me that the idea was good. Holy mackerel! And so I said to him, I said, "Are you sure you're convinced of this? Because remember, agriculture is strictly. Futures are strictly in agriculture. We're talking about finance here." He said, "Of course, there's no reason it wouldn't be any different." I actually thought it would be better. So I said to him, nobody's going to believe me that you said that. He protested, just tell him I did. And I said, no, I got to have it in writing. Oh, he said, in writing? He then said, you want a feasibility study, is that it? I guess so, I said. He says, well, I'm a capitalist. I said, how much will that cost? He said, $7,500. Well, we shook hands. And while $7,500 was no small amount in 1971, which is when this conversation occurred, I don't know what the salary of a professor at the University of Chicago was, but I'm going to assume that $25,000 would have been a big sum. Maybe it wasn't even that high. So $7,500 was a good number. We agreed. He wrote the feasibility study, of course, and I launched Currency Futures on May 16, 1972, and it's been no stopping finance from then on.
As we're having this conversation, we're actually kind of starting with the current and working our way back, and I'll go even back before your meeting with Friedman. You had this maverick idea, and I'm curious if you can. I've seen some of where you went, and you were kind of thinking along the lines of evolution and diversity. But what spurred you? Financial futures. This did not exist. So, is there something that spurred you?
Well, there's many causes. The main one is that. If you recall, in the late 60s and in 1970, the Bretton Woods system, which was a fixed exchange rate system, was constantly going through devaluation and revaluation by big numbers because the world was changing, and the idea of fixing an exchange rate once a year and having that fixed for the rest of the year was ridiculous. Now that information was flowing the way it did in the late 60s, it wasn't like it was in the 40s when we were the only country in the world on its feet after the war. So it was clear to me that fixed exchange rate was going to bust. And then there would be this constant flow of information that would change the valuations of currencies moment to moment, maybe, or certainly day to day. And wouldn't that be great for a futures market? So that was certainly a key to my belief and key to the actual launching of currency futures. But there were other reasons as well. When I was, you know, that I was a child who escaped with his parents from the Nazis, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in the travels, my father, who was a teacher, first and foremost, always used to, you know, it was a long ride, a long escape. It took about 2 years, and sometimes we would be under a given regime for a month, 2 months, 6 months. So when we were under the Lithuanian regime, my father showed me zloty, which is the Polish unit of trade, and asked me if I knew what that was, and I said, of course, that's a zloty. I was 7 years old at the time, but I knew that much. And he held up another coin, which was the lit. And I, of course, didn't know what that was. He said, it's the lit. It's the Lithuanian currency, unit of currency. And what do you think they're worth? So I ventured that they're worth the same. And he said, well, let's find out. And he took me to a bakery. And he asked for the baker to give him, how much is a loaf of bread? The baker said something on the order of 1 lit. So my father said, fine, let's take the loaf of bread. And then he handed him a zloty. And the baker said, oh, no, 2 zlotys, 1 lit, 2 zlotys. Oh. And so there was a lesson in market economics you don't get very often, but here was a real lesson for me. And my father explained that the only way you can figure out how much currency is worth is in the marketplace. Never mind what the government tells you. The government said the zloty and the lit were identical. Well, that's not true. You saw it. You know, zloty was not worth as much as a lit in the marketplace. And that's the only way you can figure out the value of currency. Well, that lesson, I got to tell you, never left me. And it's one of the reasons that I believe so much in the market. And later, when I read all of Milton Friedman's works, of course, my father had not read those, I don't think, in Poland. When he was growing up in the 20s, I doubt it. But anyway, Milton was saying the same damn thing, and I believed it. So the combination of today's events, which were the fixed exchange rate system was doomed, my own history, and one more thing. I knew, as chairman of the Merck, which was a backwater exchange of little value, really, trading in some esoteric things like pork bellies, wasn't going to go very far. I was looking to diversify the exchange. That was the number one motivation that I became chairman. It was to diversify the marketplace. I didn't think an exchange with one product line. And at that time, we were trading cattle, pork bellies, and hogs. And that's all a meat complex. And that's one line of trading. And I just thought that you had to diversify in case something went bad. In one line, you had another line and another line. And so the breakthrough to my thinking in currencies was a combination of all these things.
Mm. It's fascinating. It is truly fascinating to be at that point where something terribly unique is going to happen that's going to change the world. But I want to continue to just take a step back, because I think my audience loves the idea. Look, we're talking about you meeting with the Chinese president, you having Milton Friedman as a friend ultimately, but you didn't start that way. I mean, you started with you and your family escaping Nazi-controlled Poland. I mean, you're escaping, going across Siberia through to Japan and making it to America.
That's right.
But as a young man with a law degree in hand, eventually, you wanted another job. And so your first understanding of futures, answering a want ad for Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Finner, and Bean, looking for a runner. That was your introduction. Why don't you explain that story about what you thought Merrill Lynch was?
I thought it was a law firm. Anyone with so many names tied together can't be anything but a law firm. That's how, listen, I was 20 years old. That's what I believed. And entering law school fit my schedule for that year. John Marshall Law School was that my first class was at 2 p.m, and here's a law firm seeking runners, probably to court, I thought, from 9 to 1. Well, that was perfect. So I applied, and when I was given where to go on Monday morning, of course, I saw that I thought I was in Alice in Wonderland because it certainly wasn't a law firm. But whatever it was exciting. And when I found out what the job of running would be, I took it. It paid $20 a week. And my boss, Joe Seeger, used to slip me another 20 at the end of the week. So it was unbelievably well paid in those days. And I loved it from the moment I walked in. I knew that this was something I really wanted to do. So I finished law school, of course, and even practiced for some 8 years. But I used to divide my attention between the market and the courtroom, and the market won out.
You decided, though, to buy a seat 15 months after you first answered that one ad for a runner.
How do you know all this?
What's that?
How do you know all this?
Well, I read your book.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did decide that I wanted to be a member. Memberships were at $3,000 then, and we had gone through such holy hell before I arrived because the Congress had voted against there being a onion market because the board of directors at that time had did so many illegal conflicts that you can't even imagine, and so they were supporting memberships at 3,000. So I thought if you had to support the market, maybe there's value here, and I told my father that I wanted to buy the membership and be a member. He made me promise that I would finish law school and practice law. He didn't say forever though, and I agreed that I would. And the man, it was probably I have no doubt one of the smartest people I ever met because he knew to run out of the Nazis' hands even before the Holocaust began, in real terms. So this is a smart guy. He had about $5,000 in the bank account. What teachers don't get very much money. And he lent me $3. Out of that $5, and boy, that's a measure of his understanding the world.
That's huge faith in you at that time, right?
Yeah. I wanted to pay him back. He never would accept. So instead, when the IMM was launched in 1972, we were selling them for $10,000 a membership, right? And I bought one in his name and gave it to him as a way of repayment. So years later, when the IMM seat was selling for around $400,000, and I thought, I told my father, maybe it's time to take a profit on you. And he said, no way.
Oh, that's crazy. That's awesome. As a man who was at the Merc starting so early there in the 60s and seeing everything grow up, you had a chance to be around and see either up close, personal, from a distance, some of the best traders on the planet, many of them still today. Would you offer any just recollections? You could pick the name or pick the insight about some of the traders that you saw coming along while you were with the Merc.
Well, there were some very, very good traders that I ran into and befriended. One was actually at the Board of Trade. His name was Ralph Peters. And there was very little question in my mind that this guy was the best of the best. I mean, he took enormous positions, but he had a sense of the market, and he wasn't a scalper in the pits or anything like that. There were many that were very good, what we called scalpers. You know, they buy and sell constantly during the course of the day and come out ahead a little bit, but it adds up. This guy was a position player of enormous sort, and it just simply that he understood markets and he understood the facts and the figures, and he was a fundamentalist. He wasn't a technician, and truly a remarkable guy. That I liked him very much, although he must have had some faults, but. As a trader goes, I really admired him. I want to tell you, when I launched the Standard & Poor's contract in '82, the Standard & Poor's stock index contract made the mark because that put us really on the map with Wall Street and everybody else. And that was my desire to launch that market. But I had a lot of competition. The main competition came from the New York Stock Exchange, which was going to launch the New York Stock Exchange index, and that was formidable. So I pulled out all the stops asking people to support it. And I, of course, met with Ralph Peters and said, look, we need volume. I need volume in this new entity. It's going to be launched in April. And I'm asking you to do as much trading as you could possibly can in the Standard & Poor's contract when it's launched. I did that with every major trader. I even called Jimmy Kane at Bear Stearns. He guaranteed me he would support the Merc, and did. But Ralph Peters, so the market started, and the main thing was open interest. That's how we measured whether a market is just daily trade and it doesn't leave anything in the market, or whether the open interest grows. And if the open interest is growing, then this market has a good destiny. Anyway, the market open interest was growing. And one day Ralph Peters came to my office on an appointment and showed me that he was long, now this is 1982, right? He was long 1,000 S&Ps. And that was a figure, I can't even tell you what that represented. 1,000 S&Ps. And he was spread somewhere is what I thought, And this is 82. And I said, so where's the other side? Meaning, where's the spread? Oh, he says, I'm not spread, I'm bullish. Now, you think about where 82 was when the U.S. stock market was in 82. Unbelievable. And I don't know how long he held on to that, but he sure gave me support, and he must have made an unbelievable ton of money.
Hey, Leo, if you were thinking currency futures in the early 70s, you were surely thinking stock futures. What became that delay of nearly a decade to get stock futures out there?
You couldn't do it. It was against the reason, because in order to have stock index markets, you're trading an index, right? You can't deliver an index. You can't deliver 500 shares. It's hugely complex, and with dividends and the dividing the stock, the number of things that happen in the stock market. So it was impossible. But I knew that if you didn't have to make delivery, if you didn't need physical delivery, then I could trade indexes, and they could be cash settled on the basis of valuation in money. I went to, in 1980 and 81, I and our attorney Jerry Salzman went to the CFTC and met with Johnson. Phil Johnson was the chairman's name. And I told him that, why do you need physical delivery? That's an old way to bring a market to maturity. People don't use futures markets to gain the product. It's used as an insurance policy. That's all it really is, an insurance policy. An insurance policy, you don't want someone to deliver your house after it burned down. You want the money to build a new house. Mm. And so if it's an insurance policy, surely we could settle it in cash rather than in physical delivery. Well, that argument held water. The CFTC approved cash delivery in 1981, and I launched the first product in indexing, which was the euro-dollar contract. That was an index product for short-term interest rates that are held in the world, and it became the biggest market we ever had. But at the same time, I had already negotiated with Standard & Poor's in 1980 for a license to trade their index, the S&P 500, which I thought was better than the Dow because it was a larger index. The Dow is 30 industrials, whereas this was 500, more representative of the stock market. And they gave me license. So I knew I was going to launch the euro dollars in 81 and the next year the stock market in 82. But it all depended on the CFTC giving us approval to do cash settlement. Otherwise, none of this could have happened. With cash settlement, the expansion of the marketplace in finance was sky high. There was no, whatever your imagination warranted and the market needed, you could do because you could cash settle.
Leo, it's fascinating stuff. I have one more thought, and maybe you could comment on it as long as you'd like, but just the notion of speculation. I mean, speculation has been at the heart of your career, and the free market, the true price winning out, and speculating. This is where it's at, and I think sometimes maybe as a society and a culture, we lose sight of the fact that how important speculation is, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a pejorative.
On the contrary, without speculation, you really can't get a market. Hedgers have one interest is to insure their product, and they use the market. So if there's 100 hedgers to come, the 100 hedgers will most likely do the same thing at the same regular interval. So who are they going to sell to if there's just hedgers when they want to sell their product for a hedge and insure the price? There's nobody on the other side. The other side is just other hedgers, and they're all trying to sell. And the only way you have a market is if somebody on the other side says, well, that price is pretty good, I'll buy it. But that guy is a speculator. He hasn't got anything to hedge. He's just trying to make a buck. With him on the other side, you now have a market. Our market, I used to know that in every successful market, we had about 60% speculators and 40% commercial. And commercial buyers and sellers, they go both ways too, because they sell and they buy back and they do all kinds of things. But they're usually doing the same thing at a different time, whereas speculators take the other side of these things often. And with speculators, you end up with a market. You can't end up with a market that's all speculators, because then there is no purpose to them. Then it really is just gambling, because there's no underlying economic need. You got to have an underlying need. But once you have that, you have to have speculators.
Fascinating stuff, Leo. I could ask you questions all day. I think you know that, so I can't keep you all day. Hey, for the audience out there, obviously people can quickly Google your name and find your website, find your Wikipedia entry. There's a ton of additional information that they can read up on, and I highly recommend Escape to the Futures. We did not really talk today about the early part of your life and making it from Poland, but it's just terribly fascinating, and it's not something. It's a journey that most of us that are younger these days, obviously. We don't have to make that journey.
Yeah, and that book's been translated in 7 languages.
Well, I highly recommend it. Escape to the Futures, audience. Hey, Leo, I appreciate you taking the time today, and hopefully maybe we can talk again in the future.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for all the kind and flattering remarks, Michael.
Thank you, Leo. Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.